Shall we get started then?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha. I am in charge of partnerships community at Livagon Tokyo. I'm very happy to welcome you all to tonight's talk, how startups can successfully collaborate with Japanese corporates. Very happy to welcome Joshua from Rainmaking Innovation. He will be tonight's speaker. Feel free to drop all your tricky questions on him, everything that you would like to know. Before we move on to the main topic, I would like just to give a very short intro how Livagon, where I'm working at, is related to startup ecosystem, because I'm pretty sure that many attendees here know Livagon as a coding bootcamp, and this is true. We do teach people how to code, build applications from scratch, how to use data science for analyze your data. But aside from that, we are very actively contributing into building and nurturing the startup ecosystem globally. So we are very product-oriented bootcamp, and that results in a huge number of startups being built by Livagon alumni. Just to give you an exact number, 290 startups have been built by Livagon alumni after the bootcamp, and actually 10% of them are successfully fundraising. I think that's 70 million US dollar. That's a total amount of money that our alumni got invested in. A lot of them actually made some news and famous all over the world. About the Tokyo campus, we have 10% of our alumni who launched the startup after the graduation. Some of these companies right now are based overseas. Some of them are based in Japan. We are super proud of this fact. And from now on, we are very committed in helping our alumni to launch a company, or convincing them also to launch a company in Japan, because it's not very easy, as today's talk will prove, or maybe it will prove the opposite. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. And now I will give a microphone to Joshua. Josh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sasha, and thanks, Livagon, for the opportunity. Thanks also to everyone that has turned up and for your time tonight. So yeah, as Sasha kindly introduced, my name is Josh Flannery, and I'm working with Rainmaking Innovation Japan, actually based in Osaka. And this presentation tonight, as it says right here, it's talking about corporate and startup engagement, and drawing upon some of the lessons that we have learned as Rainmaking over the years. And I might just note that originally this presentation was designed for people working in large corporations, perhaps in the innovation department or the business development department, that were considering or interested in working with startups. So what I've done is repurposed it for you, as I suppose some of you are budding entrepreneurs, or maybe in the future you're considering starting up a company. And I'm hoping some of the insights that that we would usually share with corporations would actually be great insights for you as well as future entrepreneurs, just to see what's going on in the minds of those on the other side of the negotiation. So I won't dwell too long on this, just to give you an idea of my background. So I've had a long relationship with Japan since 2000. Wow, I'm old now. So about 21 years now, I've been coming back and forth to Japan, and probably more relevant to today, from about 2004, I've been involved in startups and the innovation ecosystem. In 2005, I brought an Australian education technology company to Japan. And for about 3 years, worked in Japan as a foreigner running a startup, which I hope some of you here listening will end up doing too. And after that, I went back to Australia, where I'm from originally, and I worked in various university and government related innovation hub roles. And then I guess in the last 2 years, I've been based here in Japan with Rainmaking, and very much focused on large corporations and startups, and basically how to create value by combining the two. So I guess along the same lines, something that we try to do as Rainmaking is drive innovation by breaking down the walls between startups and corporates, because they are such different animals. And our overall purpose is to help individuals and companies solve the world's big problems by unleashing entrepreneurship. So that's about Rainmaking and what we do. Now on to the topic. So I should say that many of these points that I'm going to present, they're not exclusive to Japan. So actually corporates all over the world have some things in common, but these ones are maybe especially important to keep in mind when planning to do business in Japan with corporations. So we've got here that corporates are keeping like a little bit overwhelmed when it comes to keeping up with startups. And I say this because there are so many startups in the world, and they get approached every day, especially the big name companies. And so for them, it is very challenging to know how and when and why to collaborate with startups. So what we have found by doing this sort of corporate startup collaboration support is that you must have a structured approach. So you can't just follow the bright and shiny hot thing at the moment, just because it's AI or just because it's Bitcoin or something like that. You have to have a structure with your approach, and the structure there's no one right way of doing it, but what we found is that these 9 key areas are things to keep in mind when you're putting that structure together. So what I'm going to do is go through these 9, and I think after maybe after 3, so at 3 and 6 and 9, I'll stop and I'll have a look at whether or not you have any questions that you've typed in the chat, and we can have a short break, and then I'll try and answer some of those questions so that we don't have to wait right to the end to do all of them. So let's move on to the first one. This sounds kind of obvious, but defining your objectives up front is so critical. And I suppose defining objectives is one thing, but what does that actually mean? So how much detail should you have when you're in discussions with a corporation and you're wanting a project to run smoothly, you're wanting to stay on the same page, and you're wanting to achieve what you're setting out to achieve? How is that possible when sometimes there are conflicting motivations? Sometimes there are communication challenges. And also sometimes the power dynamic in the relationship is not always equal. So how do you go about that? And so what we've found is 3 main things to keep in mind. Firstly, you have to really know what the strategy of the Japanese corporation is. And once you understand that, that's when you start planning how you're going to work with them and what kind of outcome that you need. Um, Secondly, the governance of the project is really critical. So we'll get to this in a later stage of the presentation, but the project might have a project lead, and it might be you or someone in your team representing the startup as the kind of key points of contact. But there are a lot of different layers within the corporation. Mid managers, senior management, C-level. So you want to have as close to the C-level, as close to the CEO and the CTO and all the other chiefs. You want to be as close to them as possible so that your project is really something that is noticed and something that's important and really valued by the corporate that you're working with. So that's the kind of second point there. And the other thing is, don't just define objectives, but also define how you are going to measure the success of each of those objectives. So it could be very simple KPIs, or there might be other outcomes that you would like for those that are maybe a little bit medium to longer term. So in short, you want to not just have a verbal agreement on these kind of things. You want to have them on paper. And so I'm sharing here an example of a project plan. And this is a really simple example. And you can see here that we're spelling out everything at the beginning of the project. So we've got the name of the companies involved, the key people, their positions, their roles, and then also at the project level, who is in charge of doing what? What's the communication method? Is it going to be Slack? Is it email? Is it regular meetings? You have to set out when you're going to meet, how often, and everything right from the beginning so that you know exactly how the project will run, how you can monitor it, and how you can quickly pick up something that's gone wrong. Because believe me, things go wrong in every project. So this is just a kind of an idea of a template that can be used for this kind of I guess a collaborative project between a corporation and a startup. You've got your milestones here. Depending on how far you want to go, you could go into very detailed timelines and Gantt charts and everything else. But it is crucial at the beginning, not only for you to fill out a sheet like this, but for your counterpart in the Japanese corporation to also fill out their part and to really understand, so you're exactly on the same page at the beginning of the project. And you may even want to go as far as signing this document as a kind of promise as to how the project will be run. Okay, moving on to point 2. So put the business units in charge. What do we mean by that? So if you are a startup or an entrepreneur looking to make a relationship or a collaboration with a large corporation in Japan, it's very likely that one of the first business units that you encounter are the innovation department. Now, the innovation department is not necessarily one of the core business units, but they might be a group of people that work across all the different business units in the corporation. And they're often very easy to communicate with compared with the other business units, because they've specifically been selected in those jobs to be ready to communicate with startups. And these days, they're also often bilingual. So for those of you that don't have strong Japanese skills, many of these staff are actually also fluent in English. So in some ways, the innovation department can be the most comfortable place for you to start a conversation. Now, that comes with positives and negatives. On the positive side, yes, you can often find people that really understand quickly what your business is and what your technology is, and what you would like to do. But unfortunately, the people in the innovation departments are not always the ultimate decision makers. And so people in the business units are often the people with not only the decision-making power, but also with the budget to be able to spend on any sort of fees that you have as part of a collaborative project. So I would just leave it at that, be aware that just because you're starting a conversation with an amazing person within an innovation department, it does not mean that they are going to be the person that's the ultimate decision maker that you need to have in order for the project to really go forward. Now, moving on to the next one, take a co-creation approach. A co-creation approach. So what do we mean by that? So when we talk to corporations about this point, like the large corporations, we really want them to understand that there's a difference between a collaborative proof of concept project with a startup and simply procuring services from a technology company. And the reason that's important to you as startup founders, or people thinking about starting up a company and maybe doing some collaboration projects with Japanese companies, is the dynamic of the relationship as a supplier and vendor. It is very much, they tell you what to do and you do it. And that in itself is important in some cases for sort of non-innovative projects where it's simply acquiring a service that exists. But if you're looking to create something new and to inject some innovation that's customized to the corporate you're working with, it can't be that kind of approach. You need to have two different opinions, two different flavors of innovation, and there needs to be a kind of tone in the relationship that both sides are contributing to something new, not simply I am a supplier, so therefore I will do everything that this huge corporation wants. So that's I guess easier said than done. But I think it's important to keep in mind, even before you enter a relationship with a corporation, because if that's not there, it will have implications on how the project ultimately unfolds. So you want to just keep in mind of how the corporate is communicating with you in the very early stages. Yeah, you can see there, I've got the example of you want to be hearing, we are going to create XYZ. not just this is what you are going to do for us. And it is quite different. So that's what we mean by co-creation and its importance. So I think I've got up to number 4 now. So what I want to do is have a look in the chat and just see if I can have a short break, have a look at the questions and answer anything that's come through. So just bear with me because I have trouble seeing the chat when I'm presenting like this. So I'm just going to open it.
Do you want me to read it to you, Josh?
Yeah, actually, that would be amazing if you could do that. Yeah.
Sure. And it's also good for people who will watch recording later because they don't have access to the chat. So we quickly moved on to the points of collaboration between startups and corporates, but we have a very important question in the chat from Brian. What are the benefits of a startup to make connections with a corporation in Japan? Why wouldn't a startup just do it alone and build their own business by using the startup goals and philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is something not necessarily only the case in Japan, but in Japan, this is certainly very, very important. So there's a bit of a chicken and the egg question when entering Japan as a new startup. Firstly, you want to have customers as soon as possible. You want to acquire revenue, and so you can keep building, right? And the way to do that is by doing sales and successfully closing sales, and then adding to your customer list, as many as possible in a short time. Now, the challenge is, in many cases, the first thing a Japanese corporation will ask you is, which other Japanese companies are you working with? And so even if you are an existing company in your own country and you're coming into Japan and you have some great case studies, they aren't necessarily always looked at the same way that a Japan customer and proven experience in Japan has. And that's because it's quite difficult and takes a while to build trust before Japanese corporations are prepared to invest in even a free trial. What is important is for you to have your Japan story, like a first Japan story. And something that actually we do as Rainmaking is we have programs which curate that first Japan story for your startup. So essentially, you're selected by our Japanese corporate partners, and you would engage in a short, relatively short project, 12 weeks. And what that does is it gives you, first of all, a pathway in to the company, but also it gives you some credit when you're speaking to other Japanese companies to be able to say, yes, we have worked with Corporation X through a program. And so that would be one thing I'd suggest. And the other thing would be to look for case studies you might have in your own country if you're running a company already, that are with companies similar to those that you're approaching in Japan. It sounds like a no-brainer, but they really want to see every little detail of how that collaboration worked, and the outcomes, and transparency is key. And once they can see that, it's only then that they will start giving you enough trust to really do business with them. So back to the question, for all of those reasons, you can't just jump in and start cold calling and expect to have lots of customers very quickly. The challenge is, partnering with a well-known name or a large company and using that credibility to then go on and do more business development. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Josh. So just a quick question from myself. So what do corporates require from startups when they give them support?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sasha. And I think, firstly, I'll say it completely varies. So it is case by case. On one side of the spectrum, there are some very large, very sophisticated Japanese corporations that have been working with startups for many years. And in those cases, things are quite simple. They will have their list of things that they require. And it's usually things associated with the due diligence that they're doing on the startup. In some ways, it's similar to how an investor would look at a startup. So they want to know about the team, what the company has done before, where the company is actually located, the examples of the client list, the revenue, basically almost an audit of what the company has done so far. It doesn't mean that new startups have no chance. They have different requirements depending on the project. So they do also work with very early stage startups, and they do tend to understand that the earlier stage the company, the more resource or support they'll need. But on the other side of the spectrum with the corporations, there are some that are just getting into this innovation world and just starting to collaborate with startups in the last year or 2 years. And for those, there is sometimes confusion about how to treat a startup and what kind of expectation to have. And sometimes they do expect unreasonable amounts and unreasonable kind of demands and service levels. So I think that goes back to the kind of first part about getting on the same page and listening to the language that's used when the corporate is talking to you, and getting a real feeling of how they perceive you and how do you fit into their portfolio of work. So yeah, Sasha, I hope that somewhat answered the question there.
Thank you. We have a question from Marisa. Do you have to have a startup visa to operate in Japan? To operate a startup in Japan?
That's a great question. And I would say, firstly, I'm not a visa expert. I actually, from what I understand, there is an upcoming talk on startup visas. Is that right, Sasha? I think I
that's
saw
right.
that. Yeah. But what I will say is, to work in any kind of company, you do need a relevant visa. For the startup visa, outside of the startup visa itself, I believe it is possible to have a sponsored business visa. Back in the old days when I came across with an education technology company, I had a business visa that the startup I was with sponsored once we established a Japan entity, a KK here. But there are also many entrepreneurs that either have, they're foreign, but they might have permanent residence, or they might be married and have a spouse visa. that I think there's a broad range of different cases. So with my little knowledge of the specifics of the visas, I would say definitely check out the startup visa and the talk coming up on that. But also, it's not necessarily the only type of visa that you can be in Japan on and be working in a startup with.
Definitely, we'll have an event about the startup visa on April 19th. So all your questions about the startup visa will be answered.
Nice, awesome.
Cool. Next question from Dmitry about co-creation. In big corporates, even the decision makers are often not 100% what they want to achieve precisely. How do you balance between precisely defining KPIs and goals and the co-creation agenda where you are sometimes left to define the goals yourself, at least partly?
Yeah. Wow, that's a question from someone who's been in the game, I think. So it's exactly right. So there are definitely some cases where the corporate knows that they need to be doing something with startups. They know what their general areas of interest are, but they don't quite have the confidence or the buy-in from C-level to be able to clearly link startup projects of any sort to the overall company strategy. And that's where there are challenges like the one Dimitri has mentioned. I think it's difficult to give a one answer broadly because it's really going to be different each time. But I think it comes back down to how the engagement began and why the engagement began. And if you are a company and an entrepreneur that is very comfortable working in ambiguity and you are confident in steering the corporate partner a particular way, maybe that's based on your prior experience doing business with other companies, either in Japan or in your home country. I think then it can be okay to lean more toward being in the driver's seat of where that collaboration is going. On the other hand, a lot of risk comes with that, and it's difficult to really know if the outcome will be worthwhile when there is that kind of uncertainness on the corporate side. And so that's where I think early you have to decide, even though this might be a huge company, that would look great to have its logo on your startup website, maybe there's just not enough certainty and too much risk for that to be the right project to go ahead with. So yeah, I'll leave that there. Hopefully that that is somewhat helpful.
Thanks, Josh. Next question from Margor. Could you give some concrete examples of customized injections of innovation you provide to the corporates you work with? How do you modify your products when you customize them for a customer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll give you an example from one of the companies that has gone through our last program cohort. And I won't mention any names, but basically there is a company that is focused on the SDG goal related to food waste, and they are repurposing particular types of food waste to create new drinks, so new consumable alcoholic beverages from bread waste. And so in their collaboration with the Japanese corporate here in our program, they ran into a very big hurdle where the Japanese company could not endorse any alcoholic related products because of their company policies. And so together that startup and the corporate engineered a slightly different product that the startup previously had never released. And it was a juice as opposed to an alcoholic drink. And so in that respect, that was kind of a clear example of being flexible about what your product is, and accepting that what you're doing in other markets might not be what you need to be doing when you're doing business in Japan. Yeah, I'm not sure if that helps, but that's the example I could think of now.
Thank you. James says, loved your documentation examples. Do you have any examples where rigid documentation went wrong?
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of examples. I can't think of a great one off the top of my head. Can I come back to that one in the next break?
Sure.
I'll try and think of something as I'm speaking. Yeah.
Oh, does Rainmaking Innovation has accelerator program in Tokyo?
Not yet. So we've got two programs running in Kansai at the moment. One is the Startup Bootcamp Scale Osaka program. Another one is a stealth secret program run with a very large electronics company. And then we're looking to obviously be in Tokyo at some point. And it's sort of up to the success of our own business development as to when that happens. But yeah, we definitely have our eye on Tokyo, and also other places like Fukuoka and Nagoya, which are also innovation hubs in their own right. Yeah.
Question from Max: how can startup protect its IP, business model, customers from the corporation? Shall it decide that it wants to cut the middleman?
Yeah, that's a classic kind of problem and fear, not just in Japan, but whenever there is a large corporation working with a startup, that is a real risk. I think it's just a matter of having an IP strategy. So first of all, I think you can go a long way by explaining what you do before you're explaining exactly how it works. So in the very early stage of the relationship building, I think you can go a long way without, for example, sharing the secret source or the code or the whatever the IP is, and by sharing case studies where the counterpart is able to see what's happening and what the results are, but they don't necessarily need to know exactly how that's happening in the early conversations. As you get deeper into the relationship, you should be signing agreements that protect you from that kind of thing happening. In some cases, I haven't seen any personally, but in some cases, it does still happen in 2021, where even when you do sign a sort of agreement that somewhat protects your IP, or should, the corporate still can go ahead and do something. I think it's happening less and less, and especially because of the reputational risk that a large corporate would be taking if doing that. So I suppose it's like it's sort of like any relationship that you're going into in your life. At some point, you have to trust. And so I guess the best or the only thing you can really do is take your time and really do some deep due diligence before you unveil anything that really puts you in a compromising situation like that.
Emmanuel is asking, will NDA not work here?
So I mean, in my experience, NDAs are used often. They do work here. I have heard stories in other places where even with an NDA, it hasn't worked. But I mean that's basically a crime. So I suppose nowhere in the world is completely safe. But personally, I think it would be quite unusual these days if you're working with a large Japanese corporate that you would be like completely have your IP stolen and for them to go and remake something exactly as you have told them. But it is a risk. So do use NDAs or other agreements. There are other sort of contracts that where you can include clauses that are similar to what an NDA would do for you. But yeah, I mean, humans are still humans, and most people are good, and there's always some bad people no matter where you are. So just be careful with who you go into business with, and then use that kind of protection like NDAs when you need to.
Question from Rinosuke. How do you build connections with C-side or executive from Japanese corporate?
Mhm. Yeah, that's the short answer is it's not easy, and I actually don't know if anyone really has a foolproof way of that working all the time. But I can give you I can give you some examples of things that have worked for me in the past. Um, so one of them is to look at what kind of business associations there are that attract the high level executives, but they're still holding events and that are related somewhat to what you're doing. It might be related to the industry, or it might just be that a particular chamber of commerce or a business chamber has innovation related networking events. So depending on where you are, I know Osaka and Kansai have something called Kanke Ren and Kansai Doyukai. So they're like the group for executives of large companies. It's like a membership group, and they tend to have particular events through the year. If you can get yourself into some of those events, that's a great way to shortcut into that world. Um, Another way is to start simply by approaching cold and working your way up in the company. So uh, in sort of the last 12 months, I spent a lot of time reaching out to Japanese corporations, um, and probably out of 100 that I contact, I probably get about 40 responses. And out of those 40, I probably have about 20 that result in a meeting. And of those 20, there might be two or three that are really at that higher level. So that's the kind of typical sales grind. I don't think there's a hack for it, but the good news is, um, unlike say 2 years ago, before COVID-19 hit, there's a lot of Japanese executives now on the Western social media platforms like LinkedIn. It is actually possible to do cold outreach on LinkedIn and have that result in a Zoom meeting, and then take that that relationship forward. I've had that happen a few times in the last year for me, and it's actually resulted in new clients. But that's literally, I'm not exaggerating, reaching out to over 100 to begin with. But the reason that's good news is a few years ago, it would be firstly almost impossible to find a relevant person in a Japanese company on LinkedIn. And secondly, to go from LinkedIn cold outreach to a real meeting and then to a real sale, that was almost unheard of, or I could never imagine that would be possible in Japan a few years ago. But I think something good that COVID-19 has brought is this kind of acceleration of using online tools like LinkedIn and Zoom. And it's kind of an interesting period because as the Japanese company staff are using these tools internally, like Zoom for meetings or what have you, they're also accepting external calls on Zoom. Whereas before you would have had to go through a process where, you were introduced by a third party and you had to go and do a formal presentation at the head office and all of that kind of protocol that comes with business culture in Japan traditionally. And now I think it's an exciting time because we can leapfrog some of that because of the new Japan that has arrived as a result of the COVID-19 situation.
Cool. Thank you, Josh. That's all questions for now, and we have 10 minutes left. Screen
Okay.
file.
Yeah. So rather than sort of rush to get to number 9, why don't we just go through one or two more and take some more questions if any come up during that time.
Sure, feel free to maybe get the most important point, or if you can summarize some points, it would be amazing.
Sure. There's this point here, number 4, where startups sit in the corporate funnel. And the main point of this slide is to remind startup founders that they are just one of many different potential collaborators that are reaching out or that are engaging with these corporations. And so many of them have particular remits to scout or hunt headhunt startups. And then on top of that, they get cold approaches like we were just talking about. So you have to really think about, how do I get my point across in the most impressive way and make life the easiest possible for my potential Japanese partner to be? And it sounds like a no-brainer, but just as a reminder, like, you're not the first startup to knock on the door, and it's likely there are similar startups with similar solutions, at least in their mind, that are already talking to them or have already knocked. So just to keep that in mind. I might skip over this, but the point here is, when you are working with a corporation, you should really, from the beginning, make sure that the counterpart or your key contact is completely dedicated, or at least know how often and when your counterpart will be available. Because then without that, it can be difficult to tell if the project is actually on hold or slowing down or going nowhere, because sometimes your Japanese counterpart may not tell you directly that they've decided to stop the project. So having a regular person there full time to liaise with and have a very clear and open relationship is critical. This is something that we tell corporations that they should have empathy for the startup founders. But in the same way, startup founders should also have empathy for those people working in those innovation departments and business units. And to just remind or try and do a kind of profile of the people that you're working with or trying to work with, and try and understand what their goals are beyond the project that you're talking to them about. So yeah, it sounds obvious, but it can be easy to just focus so much on what you are trying to achieve rather than taking a step back and really understanding the other different motivations or the other different complications that your counterpart in the Japanese company might have. Borrow bits from accelerators. So this is written for those that are not going through a program, but they are engaged in a discussion with a corporation. And the key point I'll just lift from here is one of the best things about programs like the ones that Rainmaking and other providers of programs like us run is that there's a commitment to do a project within 12 weeks. And that becomes a kind of like a kind of stick that you can wave when the project is slowing down. And more often than not, the project is slowing down because of the corporation. So I guess what I'll say there is try and put deadlines from the beginning on any project you have, and try and have the corporation agree to that. I know we're running out of time. Diversify. So just as the corporates have a portfolio, and your startup may just be one piece of one vertical within their portfolio, you should also have a portfolio of opportunities. So you should also not just put all your eggs in one basket. You should be approaching multiple corporations so that if something goes wrong with one project, you have the next one to fall back on. Again, sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not always easy to do at the same time when you're really focused on making this one relationship work. Yeah, I guess I've sort of said this. Corporates are always the bottleneck, so just be prepared and have kind of tactics. As I said, look at a collaboration agreement that has milestones and timelines and commitment to regular meetings and that kind of thing. And then look at, who's the budget owner? Is your counterpart actually able to make the decisions you need internally for the project to move to the next level, and that kind of thing. One more thing I'll squeeze in. I'm not sure if anyone out there this is relevant for, but we are actually hiring. So if you simply Google Rainmaking Osaka and lever.io, you'll see these jobs pop up. So hopefully among you, there are some business and tech inclined Japan-based or soon to be Japan-based talented folks. So I just thought I'd squeeze that in there for now. But yeah, I think that about wraps up what we have time for. And yeah, thanks. That's us.
Thank you so much, Josh. We still have a couple of minutes, you guys. If you have your last questions, feel free to share them in the chat. Thanks also for sharing your job openings. So the person should be based in Osaka, is that correct?
Yeah, so we strongly prefer that people are based in Osaka, although we do have people relocating for some roles. And depending on the project, we might consider remote, but it would have to be in Japan.
Right. Guys, so if you're interested or you have, someone who is interested, feel free to apply through the site, through the website, right? Or maybe reach out to Josh.
Yeah, sure. That's my email there.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? Or I think that we covered pretty everything. People actually through all
Yeah.
of the questions during the break time.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Cool. Looks like no question means we covered pretty everything. And in this case, I'll be happy to take the last question.
Sure.
Biggest mistakes startups make when dealing with corporates.
Yeah. Um, wow, there's so many. Um, I guess if we're thinking Japan specific, um, I think the biggest thing is just not being prepared for being more patient than you've ever had to be. So patience, patience, patience. It, it it sounds sort of weird, but it is true that there are more processes going on in the background with Japanese corporations. They're often hard to understand exactly the decision-making processes, but it doesn't necessarily mean the project or the opportunity is dead. So I would just say be patient. If you haven't heard from your counterpart for a couple of weeks, check in politely. Um, every time you check in, as opposed to just saying, do you have an update? Check in with something new, something of value. Share something that you came across that they might find valuable, even if it's not directly related to your service or product. And then they will that will actually act as another way for them to start building trust and to start valuing you for more than just what you're hoping they will buy.
So from your experience, how long does it usually take from just approaching the corporate to actually signing a contract and starting doing something?
Yeah. um, I would say 6 months. I mean, it depends on what you're selling, and what kind of company you're speaking to. But on average, so say for us, so we're also in a way a startup. So we're not a tech startup, but we are a small firm that's entered the market recently. And yeah, probably 6 months. Um, yeah, of back and forth of proposals being written and rewritten, um, of including face-to-face meetings and lots of Zoom and all of that good stuff. So it is a long time, but on the flip side, it's more likely that they're going to stay with you a long time. So they actually, because they've invested so much leading up to closing that a deal with you, they don't want to leave you. And I think that's different to doing business in other parts of Asia, where it might be a quicker sales cycle, but it's also a quicker exit cycle. And so I think once you're in, yeah, if you can have the patience and if you can stay funded until you close your first few deals, yeah, it's definitely worthwhile.
Cool. And it's 8 p.m. right now in Japan. I think that we covered most of the questions. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to contact Josh by LinkedIn, by email that he provided. Thank you so much, Josh. It was very insightful. I'm
Thank
pretty
you.
sure that everyone got so many questions answered today.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. And thanks everyone for putting up with my voice for the last hour, and have a great night. Hope to see some of you around in Japan.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us until that late. Looking forward to seeing you at our next events. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
great
Bye.
evening.